Welcome to our channel, Gray Matters. We are two neurodivergent ladies who fixate and need to share, and we've created this channel to do just that. Since we started speaking out about the treatment of Micah leading up to the loss of her life, we have become passionate about learning about coercive control. We wanted to share an overview of what coercive control is, and then we will talk about the push for South Carolina to put Micah's Law on the books. It is important to know that domestic violence doesn't happen only in the physical sense. Because domestic violence's goal is control and power by the perpetrator, abusers use a number of techniques to intimidate and isolate their victim.
The behaviour is intended to harm, punish, frighten, dominate, isolate, degrade, monitor, or stalk the victim survivor. It creates a power dynamic where the perpetrator is in control of the victim survivor. Coercive controlling behaviours can affect a person's immediate safety. They may not be able to access support, or they may fear being tracked or caught out if they try and seek help. But as
tactics make identifying abuse in the traditional sense quite complicated, which ultimately leads to the victim feeling trapped by their intimate partner. The U.S. Department of Justice identifies domestic violence as physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, and technological abuse perpetrated by an intimate partner. Typically, children who grow up witnessing abuse in the home are predisposed to social and physical problems, in addition to often continuing the cycle of violence once they hit adulthood. Let's talk about the Violence Against Women Act of 1994. This bill gave $1.6 billion toward investigating and prosecuting violent acts against women, enacting automatic and mandatory restitution, allowing civil action against prosecutors who don't prosecute domestic violence cases, and also established the Office on Violence Against Women. The 2005 reauthorization of the Act included a definition for the term, quote, underserved populations for targeting programs to prevent abuse, and prevented the use of polygraph tests with a victim of domestic violence. In 2012, the Act was renewed with the provisions of including same-sex partners, creating provisions for undocumented immigrants who are being abused to seek temporary visas, and added protections for victims of human trafficking. In 2009, the Act was renewed again with provisions added to protect transgender victims and Indigenous women, and a ban on convicted domestic abusers from purchasing firearms. This is known as the boyfriend loophole. The boyfriend loophole was removed from the renewal in 2022 when the bill was amended to include protections for Native Hawaiian survivors. Gender-neutral terms have been added to include any victim of intimate partner violence. Since the initial passing of this act, programs and services for victims have increased, and colleges are now federally required to report crimes. There was, and continues to be, conservative backlash to this bill, and we hear about it when the bill has provisions added on. Opposition says that the act paints women as victims and men as violent offenders, promotes the breakdown of marriages and hatred of men, and is an instigator for false accusation, which is statistically incredibly rare. Because I am a podcast fan first, I knew where to go to learn about coercive control. Laura Richards is a renowned criminal behavior analyst. She trained at New Scotland Yard and the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. She has degrees in psychology, sociology, and forensic and legal psychology. She's award-winning and has changed how the UK handles domestic violence cases. She's an expert in domestic abuse, coercive control, stalking, sexual violent homicide, and risk assessment. She's a trainer, a podcaster, an author, and is just overall amazing. Laura defines coercive control as a strategic pattern of behavior designed to exploit, control, create dependency, and dominate. According to Laura, quote, when we understand what coercive control is, it's really about a power imbalance, entrapment, and utter dominance. The abuser uses love bombing and charm to gain favor with the victim. Methodically, the abuser uses tools to erode the victim's autonomy, creating a dependence on the abuser. Often this is done so gradually, the victim doesn't even know that they are being abused. It is akin to brainwashing.
She was at a point where she was really understanding what happened to her and being able to see the relationship for what it really was instead of being in that spider web. You know, it's a big moment when women like Micah are able to say, I was groomed. And she was doing that in February 2024, and I bet that really scared him.
Yes, and coercive control, that is grooming and it's manipulation. So we want people to use that language. I really want people to understand coercive control so they can say, I am being or I was being coercively controlled. And then we understand manipulation, grooming, that things are very foggy for them probably, because it's like being in a fog. When you have listened to that person, you trust them, you believe them, and you've done everything they said, and then you realise that they're a bad actor, they're not acting in your best interest, that gaslighting. It can be very confusing and very conflicting. So to take that step for her to leave, I mean, really she left with nothing, right? Because the church, that's where she worked, she lived with him, she was really under his spell in that environment, financially, when he didn't pay her, where he sacked her, where she was very dependent on him. So to move away from that, where the cars, you know, all came from him because he controlled her in that way. So she leaves with very little and she's trying to re-establish herself. And that is a very difficult situation for anybody. It's very lonely, it's very isolating. And I believe he kept...
On her website, Laura says, quote, "The abuser replaces the victim's inner narrative and thoughts with their own. The abuse is nuanced and subtle and often doesn't leave physical marks."
I just want to tell you what a lot of people have told me lately and reminded me, because I think I forgot. I knew, but I pushed it in the back of my head just because of my situation. But you are the...
Some hallmarks of coercive control include isolation, gaslighting, financial abuse, rules and guidelines for the victim's behavior, and these are gradually introduced to maintain the relationship with the victim per their emotional investment. Signs for victims to be aware of include isolation, pressure to do things you don't want to do, inserting into relationships, criticizing and verbal abuse, gaslighting, threats, charm, rules and regulation, disrespect, stalking, physical abuse, economic abuse, sexual abuse, and love bombing. Laura also discusses stalking and honor-based abuse under the umbrella of coercive control. She defines stalking as, quote, "a pattern of unwanted, fixated, and obsessive behavior which is intrusive and causes fear of violence or serious alarm or distress." Honor-based abuse is defined as a crime or incident which has or may have been committed to protect or defend the honor of the family and or community. This form of abuse is often committed with approval or agreeability from family and community members. I contend that religious abuse can be used in tandem with honor-based abuse. Laura used her expertise to create a tool called the Domestic Abuse, Stalking, and Honor-Based Violence Risk Identification, Assessment, and Management Model, or DASH Risk Assessment. It was designed to make law enforcement proactive in asking questions to assess the threat for violence in a domestic situation. The ultimate goal of DASH is to identify high-risk and serial perpetrators, prompt early intervention in domestic violence situations, identify risk factors for victims, streamline investigations through information sharing and common language, and strengthen law enforcement's ability to make educated decisions. DASH is meant to be used by all professionals who work with domestic violence victims. Laura offers training for law enforcement. DASH has been implemented in the UK in all police services since March 2009.
Coercive control has been an offence in the UK since 2015. But what is it? Is the law working? And how can you spot whether it's happening to you? Under the Serious Crimes Act, the following must be true for someone to be convicted of this offence.
That the abuser is personally connected to the victim,
their behaviour has had a serious effect on the victim, and the abuser knew or ought to have known that their behaviour would have a serious effect on you. Your abuser's behaviour is considered to have a serious effect if, on at least 2 occasions, the victim has feared that violence will be used against them, or they have felt serious alarm or distress and it has had a substantial effect on their usual day-to-day activities.
Before this law, the only way that domestic abusers were convicted was if they were physically assaulting victims. But coercive control is far more subtle than that and more difficult to spot, especially as victims become further detached from family and friends.
Here are the key signs that it's happening to you or someone you know. Isolating you from friends and family.
He convinced her to move away from our family and live with people from the church, saying our family is not good Christians, not good for her.
Spying on your social media or devices.
When my wife went in the hospital, I looked at her phone and I counted over the past 2 years 18 people who had texted her and said, if you ever want to talk about your husband, you can talk to me and say anything and I'll keep it confidential. Why the heck does somebody want to hear what somebody else says about their spouse? And 2 of those 18 were men.
Taking control over aspects of your everyday life, such as where you can go, who you can see, what you can wear, and when you can sleep.
She had Diana watch her every day and say, John Paul's going to say in these cases that I am mentally unstable because I'm not on my medication. Please watch me. Her last straw was him putting her into the mental hospital against her will. The police. He lied to the counselors at the mental facility. He ran in there and said, my wife's trying to kill herself. You need to come get her, which wasn't the truth. She actually ran away from him.
Depriving you access to support services such as medical services.
My husband, I need some help. I need my medication, and he would not bring it to her. He got it out and didn't tell her. He picked it up, didn't give it to her, kept it from her, went to sleep anyway while she was waiting to try to meet him to get some.
What was happening? He would always use a location on her phone. So he's been tracking her for years.
Repeatedly putting you down, such as saying you're worthless.
Calm down, Micah, stop.
He had been, I guess, quote, training her for a long time, and that how a wife is supposed to respond even to an abusive husband.
Just so you know, ladies, if you want a good man, this is what you have to do right here. Ready? She bowed down with her face to the ground and said, I am your servant. I am ready to serve you. I'm just saying.
Humiliating, degrading, or dehumanizing you.
There was allegations as well that he posted some pictures of her, private pictures of her online that might have showed her topless.
And she mentioned that her husband would make her watch unholy acts.
I'm sorry, her husband would what?
Make her watch unholy acts.
Controlling your finances.
But there are other things that happened that are related to this church. She was employed there. There's a question about whether she was appropriately paid for her time.
And he would lavish her with things and items because his behavior did not match what would be a true love. He is the kind of person that tries to buy love, and he expects loyalty. And if he does you a favor, he expects reciprocation. Nothing ever comes from him without a price.
Making threats or intimidating you.
You can't come to someone's house threatening with a gun. There's kids involved. And I mean, come home right now, or I'm going to come to you. Okay. I can't believe you're doing this. You're a horrible wife. If you don't come home right now, then all of your stuff is going to be out of the house by 9 a.m. And
depriving you of basic needs.
John Paul stole her car, her wallet, her purse, everything that she had that she thought she was hers. Now in John Paul's eyes
The hope is victims are made to be comfortable and feel safe when interacting with law enforcement. As Laura says, law enforcement should, quote, ask yourself, am I satisfied that I have done all I can? Let's talk about Micah and what her family and friends are hoping her legacy will be. On June 5, 2004, Micah's attorney, Regina Ward, who is now representing the Francis family, held a press conference where she released Micah's list. The full list is available on Luna Shark Media's website. This list is a compilation of allegations of coercive control committed by John Paul Miller against Micah. The list was compiled from Micah's journal entries, as well as the things she told the people she trusted most in her life. Regina Ward is demanding that these examples of coercive control be added to the original coercive control bill introduced in South Carolina in 2020. I bet you're wondering why. If a bill was introduced back in 2020, JP has never been charged with anything at this point. The answer is simple. The bill was introduced 3 times and died each time after being referred to the Senate's Committee on Judiciary.
It's called the Coercive Control Bill. Ward says it was introduced once in 2020 and twice in 2021, but actually never made it out of committee. Ward says the bills outline the protections victims of mental, physical, financial, and more need in order to protect themselves from their abusers. Ward says when law enforcement responds to a domestic violence situation, they look for bruises or marks to make an arrest. But she says a lot of the times you can't see the abuse or control. Ward wants the most recent bill to add more protections and rename it to Micah's Law because it could save many lives.
What this family wants you to do is to help this. We want Micah's Law. We want the Coercive Control Bill to be looked at, taken seriously, put some time into it, and somebody make an amendment to add your name as a sponsor and make an amendment to call it Micah's Law.
Had this bill passed, an arrest may have happened, which would have led to a restraining order against him, allowing Micah the possibility for escape. Had JP been locked up, Micah could have been kept safe. Regardless of how Micah's life ended, JP is responsible, based on this list. Regina Ward and the Francis family are also pushing to change the name of the bill from the Coercive Control Bill to Micah's Law.
This man, he abused her in every possible way that there is. Financially, he abused her by taking away things, phones, access to money, took away her car, those types of things to try to gain control of her every time.
So you don't have to stay in a abusive relationship, whether that's sexual, whether that's somebody forcing you to take illegal drugs, or alcohol abuse, or physical abuse, psychological abuse, making you think that this is all your fault, or you're a bad mom, or you're a bad wife, or you're a bad husband, or you're not giving it your all when you know you are. God hates divorce, but why? According to everybody I've asked and the scriptures that I've found, it's because it hurts people. But does abuse hurt people? How do you think God feels about that? A bunch of people have been reminding me lately that I'm God's bride first. And even an earthly spouse who's a good spouse, when they know that their bride is being hurt, just imagine what an earthly spouse does. What do you think your heavenly spouse does? When you're the bride of Christ and he sees his bride going through abuse and hurt, what do you think he thinks about that? Encouragement in all this is you are the bride of Christ first before anybody else's. And he's got you. And he sees you. And he loves you.
So like what?
Thank you for listening. Please comment, like, and subscribe. You can also check out our podcast, Fixate Today, Gone Tomorrow, for more content. Have anything you'd like us to fixate on? Reach out and let us know. Thanks for joining us. Disclaimer: we are not investigators, journalists, detectives, law enforcement, or historians. We are two neurodivergent ladies who just hyperfixate. Please do not take our opinions and ideas as statements of fact. All allegations are just that. We are not accusing anyone of anything, simply offering our interpretation of what we've researched.